Welcome to Lessons from a Podcaster, a show where we interview podcasters from all around the world and ask them to share their tips, insights, stories, and everything you need to know to grow your own podcast. This show is brought to you by PodSqueeze, the essential tool for any podcaster that wants to take their show to the next level. Let's get started with our host, Tiago.
Hello, David. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Appreciate you having me on.
Let's start with the 1 minute pitch challenge. So let's say someone meets you at a party and they ask you about your podcast, what it's all about. What do you answer?
So I would say, each week I talk about a useful psychological or philosophical tool that can be used to help improve a person's way of thinking. So I draw on a lot of things like humanistic and existential psychology, on like Stoic philosophy. There's a certain amount of Buddhism in there because that's quite a big interest of mine. The applicable stuff that I think might be useful for people. Each episode's about 20 minutes long, and they're basically designed to be easily accessible. So I want to try and make them as little shots of information that people can take away, give them some ideas, and then signpost them to other things that might be useful to try and improve their knowledge on it if they wanted to.
That sounds really interesting. I think it's a topic that more and more is raising a lot of interest among people. When did you start this journey, this project?
So it started as a podcast in January of 2023, but it came off the back of a Substack article that I was writing. So I kind of set myself a challenge to write an article every day in July of 2023, and then kind of went through it, slowed down a bit towards the end of the year, and then the podcasting aspects came out in Substack, and I thought, okay, well, this is cool, I can give it a go. Again, wanted to challenge myself to do a podcast every week, just to try and be consistent and to get something out there, basically, and just sort of see what happens.
What is your background?
It's a bit of a mixed bag. So I started off many years ago in engineering, and I do software engineering during the day. And I then, whilst I was doing the day job, I went to night college and I trained as a psychotherapist. So I did a little bit of that on the side. I'm not really doing that much anymore, but a lot of that kind of work in psychotherapy and that training drives the content in the podcast, essentially. So I used to do client work. I've stopped just because it was too much doing the day job and that on the side as well. And I kind of thought, well, part of the podcast was, well, how can I try and give back to people? What can I, without doing one-to-one sessions, what can I do to try and give back and try and support people in their sort of journey as a human being fundamentally? So that was a bit of the motivation for it.
It's amazing. What a great diverse background.
Thank you. It's a bit of a mixed bag, but yeah, definitely.
Do you remember that first episode? Like, how did you record it? Were you happy with the results?
Excuse me. I did it. I didn't have the same setup as I have now. I had a cheap, like 30 pound microphone from Amazon, like a USB thing. It was about 12-13 minutes long. They're about 20 odd minutes, just over 20 minutes now. I struggled to think of what to say because I'm quite a natural introvert, so talking doesn't necessarily come naturally. So it was very much like, I've got to try and get 10 minutes of content out and say something that I think is going to be useful. And I'll be honest, I thought it was, I wasn't happy with it, but I think part of the challenge of doing the podcast was to ignore that kind of need for perfectionism. Just do it, put it out into the ether, and just let it go, and then move on. That was, that's trying to sort of get into that mindset with it.
Yeah, I think that's the beauty of podcasting as well. It's a very simple format, right? It doesn't require a lot of things. It doesn't require a lot of lights, and you just need a cheap microphone. And you just release it. But now let's talk about your current stack. So you said that you started with this cheaper microphone. Now you probably have something more advanced. Tell me everything from idea to publishing your episode. What's your stack?
Sure thing. So I've got notes on the iPad, and I'll just sit down and I'll read stuff. I love reading about philosophy and psychology anyway, so I will be reading something. I'll come across something that week which I think could be useful to people. I'll do a bit more research, and I'll just make loads and loads of notes on everything, and then I'll have a bit of a kind of bullet point outline of things that I want to go through in the episode. So it's not like I tend not to script it, but I'll just go, right, I want to go through all of these in this sort of order and give it some structure. So I'll start off with that. And then I record everything. I've got a Logitech Yeti X Mic now, which is infinitely better than the one I had originally. We've got the Elgato Facecam if there's any video stuff going on. And I do all the recording in Adobe Audition and then sort of mix everything down. So I've got an intro and an outro MP3 that goes at the obviously front and the back, and then I do the recording in Audition.
How did you do the intro MP3? Did you do it yourself, or did you hire someone to do it for you?
I did it myself, yeah. So part of the Adobe stuff, I've got the Adobe stock thing, and I downloaded a bit of one of the stock audio sort of loop music tracks.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Did the voiceover for it, and then just blended that together into one sort of mix down, basically, that then sits at the front and the back.
Okay. Is it an easy software to use, Adobe?
I don't mind it. I find it's pretty good to use. I've come across simpler ones where it's literally drag and drop, but I've been using it for a little while on and off, so it hasn't got too much of a learning curve, I'd say.
Okay. So once it's ready, what software or host provider do you use to publish your episodes?
So all of the podcasts go onto Substack, and then what I've done is, this is fairly recently actually, I've linked the Substack RSS feed for the podcast into YouTube, because there's a podcasting thing on YouTube now.
Oh yeah.
So what happens is, as soon as your podcast comes out, and this is for whatever podcast host you use, the RSS feed goes into YouTube, give it an hour or two, and then you get a video on YouTube that's created of your podcast as well, so you can push it out to different platforms on that one. But obviously, before I do any of the publishing, I upload the MP3, the mix down, into Podsqueeze, which then creates a wonderful amount of content for me to go and do my social marketing, video clips, quotes, all of that kind of stuff. So it's an absolute godsend in terms of time saving. It's
that is
big
amazing
help.
to hear.
Big help.
What are the assets that you use the most from Podsqueeze?
Generally, it's sometimes the title is really useful. Just if I can't quite work out what I want to call it, having some suggestions on the title's great. The LinkedIn and Facebook social posts are really good. Sometimes I'd use like the blog post or newsletter if I want to do like a longer form social thing going out. But I think it came in fairly, obviously you can tell me on this, but what I saw fairly recently was the media content side, and being able to create video snippets of, well, basically sets it up in, I think I got like 6 or 7 sections of the podcast broken down, which then can be converted into into video for like TikTok, Instagram Reels, all that sort of stuff. So yeah, that media content I'm using quite heavily at the minute. It's very cool. Very cool feature.
Amazing. Yeah, it's a new feature that we just launched, and it's great to see that people are using it. Tell me, let's go out of the more nerdy stuff of tech stack and go back to your podcast. What is the most memorable episode, either because it was really fun or because it was a struggle or you learned a lot? Does one come to your mind?
There is, and it's actually a 2-part one that I did back in September, October, I think, last year. And I was chatting with a friend of mine, and we were talking about the well-being industry as a whole. And both of us think that there's a certain like commoditization of well-being that we think is a bit toxic, like all of these different pills and potions and mindsets and things that are supposed to make you happy. And we both sort of disagree with it. So I thought, well, I could really let rip on this and have a good old rant about my thoughts on the well-being industry. And it was nice because I think it was at that point it was about then that the podcasts were getting a bit longer. I was getting a bit more comfortable talking and what have you. And I think it was about then that I completely let go of being concerned about what people thought of what I was saying. So I just totally
Wow.
let go. And it was really liberating just to be, well, this is what I think. And, it's not offensive or anything. I'm just like, well, I think this could be better and I don't agree with this and da-da-da. And I managed to squeeze in right at the end, because we were talking about, it got a little bit into like the cult mindset and how people
Right.
kind of get pulled into these
Yes.
ideas and these thoughts. And I managed to recap the story of a time when I was in London, and I wandered into the Scientology Museum.
Wow.
They're going to come for us talking about this in London, and it was just like a big exhibition. So, right, you can come and have a look round. And I'm looking around with a friend of mine, and I said to her, if they ask us to do a test, say we have to go for meet friends for dinner, we have to leave. And she's like, don't be ridiculous. They're not going to do that. Within 5 minutes, they've come out and gone, we'd like to take you into a room to talk to our psychologist. And we were like, right, we got to go. I came that close to being a Scientologist, basically. So that's,
Wow. That was close.
it's close
So
stuff.
when you released that episode where you kind of freed yourself and you decided to talk more freely, did you get any not so positive feedback or any feedback from your friends or your listeners?
I got a few bits of feedback. One of my friends said, basically, don't talk about Scientologists. But yeah, it was quite positive. There wasn't a huge amount of feedback, but it was nice to see that people share the same thoughts and can see some of the things that are a little bit skewed with how some of that well-being industry is done. Not all of it, obviously, but
Yeah.
certain aspects of it. So yeah, it was nice. It was quite nice just to see people, share
Yeah.
the ideas, really.
Yeah. What I like about podcasting is that there's a lot of purposes, right? It can be to make money. It can also be for self development, right? And in your case, it's been great as well for you to practice speaking and
Yeah.
also to learn more about the topic that you love. What are the next steps for your podcast? Like, where would you see the podcast in a year, and what are you going to do to achieve those goals?
So I'd love to get the viewership into like four figures, but I see that as a high thing. I think I've got to I'd like to see the viewership grow, or the listenership grow, I should say. And I think, to be fair, the only way that I can really see of doing that is just to be consistent and to keep doing what I'm doing, and just to, let fate do its thing. I think eventually, if you put enough effort into something, then if you're putting out decent content, then I think you'll get somewhere.
Right.
I'd always feel it's like 50% 50% quality, 50% luck.
Mhm.
Sometimes it doesn't work, but you've just got to be consistent. I don't want to have too many expectations on it, and just see where it goes. Really, I think the fact that doing it for the enjoyment, I think is fundamentally the goal. So
Yeah.
if one person listens to what I've said and they get something out of it and it helps them in some way, I've done my job.
Mhm. Can you tell a story of some feedback or someone that came to you because they listened to your podcast or an episode and somehow touched them in any way?
Yeah, yeah. So I did I did funnily enough end up getting a therapy client off the back of the podcast, which was interesting. I was basically talking about letting go of stuff in the past and about being present. And it resonated with them quite a lot, and we ended up sort of chatting for about 5-6 weeks on and off, just going through some of their stuff, and managed to help them through a few mental blocks they had. So that was really, really quite rewarding. I say a client, it was more a case of we were just chatting on video
Right.
and a few emails and stuff. But it was quite nice to see that some of the stuff is able to change a way that someone thinks for the better.
Yeah, totally understand. And as we were talking before starting this episode, it's amazing I'm always surprised that there's people that want to listen to us, in a weekly basis, for instance.
Yeah.
But so as a last question, what advice would you give to a podcaster that is just starting? They're let's say also podcast in the same area as
Mhm.
kind of mental health and psychology. And
Yeah.
what advice would you give him or her?
I would say, and I think this is advice I would give myself as well, going back a year. Don't worry about getting it perfect. Don't worry about getting it exactly right, and don't be frightened of putting it out into the world. I think there was a bit of procrastination I found, and a bit of fear putting out those first few episodes. But the worst thing that's going to happen is someone's not going to agree with you, and that doesn't matter, and it doesn't matter that it's not perfect. The important thing is that you're doing it, and just be consistent. Do it. If you're going to do it, if you say you're going to do it every week, do it every week, and make it a part of your kind of your process. And yeah, I guess that's it. Yeah, just don't be frightened. Don't be perfect, and be consistent.
Yeah, totally agree. And I think being consistent is really important. It's really key.
Yeah.
Most of podcasts end up stopping, or most of podcasters end up giving up after 2 or 3 episodes. So just the fact that you are able to push further than that, you're already winning. So that's great feedback, David. Just tell us, where can we find you? Like, what are your socials? Where can we listen to your episode? Tell us again the name of the podcast. I don't know if we actually mentioned it.
Do you know what? I don't think I did. I'm doing really bad at talking about myself here. So the podcast is called The Observing Eye, and that's the letter I, not the eye that you see with.
Okay.
You can find it on the main home of it is on Substack, and the address for that is theobservingeye.substack.com. If you like YouTube, you can find all of the episodes on YouTube as well, and that's youtube.com/@theobservingeye. And then on socials, we're on TikTok and Instagram with the handle @theobservingeye as well.
Perfect. I will link everything in the show notes, and as well, of course, mention the episodes or the podcast in the introduction. But for the listener, just make sure to go to the show notes and check out The Observing Eye. And David, thank you so much for being a guest in the Lessons for a Podcaster.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
This podcast is brought to you by PodSqueeze, an essential tool for podcasters that creates show notes, timestamps, clips, and more. Visit podsqueeze.com and use the code PODCASTER for 20% discount in the first 3 months. We release a new episode every Tuesday and Thursday. See you in the next episode of Lessons from a Podcaster.